16-year-old Aaliyah Moore, a black girl living with a disability, faced Captain Rick Holden in court, the same officer who claimed she attacked him. In front of the judge, Holden suddenly stepped forward and slapped her across the face. The room went silent. But Holden didn't know Aaliyah's mother was a high-ranking CIA officer, and she was about to walk through those doors. What happens when the wrong man picks the wrong target in front of the whole court? If this grabs you, like, share, and leave a comment. Now let's step inside that moment. The air inside courtroom 3 was colder than the winter wind outside. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale, almost sterile glow over the packed room. Wooden benches groaned under the weight of bodies leaning forward, eyes fixed on the double doors at the back. Even before anything had begun, you could feel it, the charge in the air, the quiet sharpening of judgment. Maya Torres sat in the last row, her notebook open on her lap, pen poised like a weapon. As a freelance journalist, she had covered enough small-town trials to know when something was off. She'd slipped in early, pretending to check her phone, then quietly snapped a photo of the day's docket. One name stood out in bold black ink: Aaliyah Moore, 16 years old, black, charged with assaulting a police captain. The murmur began before the door even moved. A couple of men in the front row leaned toward each other. "That's her," one whispered voice dripping with disbelief. "Doesn't look dangerous," the other replied, his smirk almost audible. Then the doors opened and all the heads turned. Aaliyah stepped in slowly, the rubber tips of her crutches thumping against the tiled floor. Her left leg, thin and stiff from an old injury, dragged slightly behind her right. The gray hoodie she wore hung loose, the sleeves pulled down over her hands like she was bracing herself against more than just the cold. Her eyes stayed forward, scanning neither left nor right, as though the stares bouncing off her skin were nothing more than background noise. Maya's pen stilled for just a moment. She'd seen defendants try to mask fear before, but this wasn't fear. This was something quieter, heavier. Captain Rick Holden, the man she was accused of attacking, sat at the prosecution's table, his uniform so crisp it could have cut glass. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes followed Aaliyah like a hunter who already knew where the prey would run. As she passed him, his mouth curled, not quite a smile, not quite a sneer. "You're in my world now, kid," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Aaliyah's pace didn't change, not when she crossed the aisle, not when she reached the defense table. But for the first time, her eyes flicked sideways, meeting his for the briefest second. Maya couldn't tell if it was defiance or simply the act of refusing to look away. Up on the bench, Judge Marion Blake flipped through the case file like someone skimming a magazine article they'd already read. She was a tall woman in her late 50s, her white hair pulled back into a severe bun. Her expression was neutral, but there was something about the way she moved past certain pages that made it feel rehearsed, as if the ending had been decided before the first gavel strike. David Cole, a young court clerk with sharp eyes, stood by the side wall. He watched Aaliyah in a way that wasn't just procedural. There was a hint of concern there, quickly masked whenever the judge glanced his way. The room quieted when the bailiff called the court to order. Aaliyah stood at the defense table, her crutches angled beside her chair. She didn't fidget, didn't bow her head. She just waited. From somewhere in the gallery, a woman's voice whispered, "Poor thing doesn't stand a chance." Rick Holden's attorney leaned over and whispered something in his ear. Whatever it was made him chuckle under his breath. The sound seemed to echo far louder than it should have in that tense room. Judge Blake cleared her throat. "We are here for the matter of the state versus Aaliyah Moore, charged with aggravated assault on a law enforcement officer." Her gaze lifted briefly from the papers to the girl standing before her. "Miss Moore, do you understand the charges against you?" "Yes, Your Honor," Aaliyah said, her voice calm but low. Holden tilted his head, pretending to study her like a curiosity, still talking polite. "Let's see how long that lasts," he murmured. Maya's pen scratched across the page. That wasn't just arrogance, it was possession. like he thought this trial belonged to him. The prosecutor began outlining the incident in clipped official tones. On the evening of December 14th, Captain Holden responded to a disturbance at a loud scrape cut him off. It was Aaliyah's chair shifting as she adjusted her crutches. The sound was nothing dramatic, but in the pin-drop silence of that courtroom, it pulled every eye back to her. Maya noticed her hands tightening on the handles, her knuckles white. Not with fear, no. This was something else. The kind of quiet tension you saw in someone who had learned over and over again that the world would rather speak for them than let them speak for themselves. The prosecutor kept going, painting Holden as the calm professional who had suffered an unprovoked attack. Holden leaned back in his chair, the picture of wounded dignity. David Cole, still at his post near the wall, leaned slightly toward Maya as he passed behind the gallery. His voice was barely a whisper, but she caught every word. If this goes the way they want, she's done for. Maya looked at him, but he'd already moved on, his expression neutral again. She glanced back at Aaliyah. The girl sat still, her gaze locked forward as if the rest of them, the whispers, the smirks, the gavel, the lies, were just part of a storm she'd decided to face head on. The trial hadn't even started yet, but the room already felt split in two, those certain of her guilt and those who had begun quietly to wonder. The clerk called Aaliyah's name, and for a moment the room held its breath. She rose slowly, pushing herself up with the help of her crutches. The soft thunk of rubber tips against the wooden floor echoed as she made her way to the witness stand. Every step looked deliberate, not hesitant, not rushed. Deliberate. When she reached the stand, she leaned her crutches against the railing, careful not to let them clatter. Her right hand rested briefly on the wood, and then her eyes lifted, moving from one face to another in the gallery, pausing just long enough for people to realize she was looking right at them. It wasn't a glare. It wasn't fear. It was something quieter, heavier. Like she was silently measuring the weight of every judgment in the room. Across from her, Captain Rick Holden lounged in his chair at the plaintiff's table. The smirk was already there, as if he'd been saving it for this exact moment. His gaze slid up and down her, like she was nothing more than a defendant-shaped inconvenience. Then, with a slow shake of his head, he mouthed two words. "You're done." Judge Marion Blake leaned forward slightly. "Miss Moore?" She began, her tone flat, but already tinged with accusation. "Tell the court in your own words what happened the night of December 14th. Aaliyah opened her mouth. Please keep your answers brief." The judge cut in before the first sentence could form. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Aaliyah tried again. "I was walking home when Captain Holden—" "Just the facts." Judge Blake interrupted, her gavel tapping once against the bench. "No unnecessary details." From the back row, Maya's pen scraped hard across the page. She'd seen judges cut off defendants before, but this felt different. Almost like Blake didn't want the story, she wanted the version already written in the charges. Still, Aaliyah pressed on. "Captain Holden confronted me near—" "That's enough," the judge snapped. "We'll hear from Captain Holden in due course." Holden's grin widened as if the bench had just confirmed what he already believed, this court belonged to him. David Cole, standing near the clerk's desk, caught something the others didn't. While the judge moved on to the next procedural question, Aaliyah's hand dipped into the pocket of her hoodie. She pulled out a small spiral notebook and, shielding it from sight, scribbled a few words with quick, precise strokes. It wasn't the kind of absent-minded doodling most people did under stress. No, this was deliberate, intentional, almost like she was recording something she didn't trust anyone else to remember for her. David's brow furrowed. Evidence. A timeline. Whatever it was, she wasn't supposed to have it up there. But she moved with the kind of care that suggested she'd done this before. At the back, Maya lowered her notebook just long enough to lift her phone. She angled it, catching a perfect frame. Holden's narrowed eyes locked on Aaliyah, every line of his face carved with open hostility. The hatred there wasn't subtle, it was raw, unpolished. She hit send and attached it to a message for her editor. "This is going to blow up." The quiet hum of whispered gossip rolled through the room, low enough to avoid a gavel, but loud enough to be noticed. Somewhere to Maya's left, a man in a wool coat leaned toward his neighbor. "This is tied to that federal probe, isn't it?" he murmured. The neighbor gave a quick glance toward the door, then back to the front. "Keep your voice down," he said. But the seed was planted. A few heads in the gallery turned as if reassessing what they thought they knew. On the stand, Aaliyah's hands stayed folded on her lap now, but her eyes told a different story, alert, calculating. She wasn't folding. Not yet. Judge Blake, apparently satisfied that she had kept things on her chosen track, motioned for the bailiff to step forward. "We'll adjourn for a short recess before the next witness." As people began to stand, Holden leaned toward the security officer stationed near the aisle. Their exchange was quick, but the body language said enough. Holden's chin lifted slightly, his mouth curved with that same predator's confidence. The officer gave the barest of nods and whispered back, "She won't last the morning." It was the kind of comment meant to stay buried in the hum of the crowd. But David, still by the clerk's desk, heard it clear as day. His jaw tightened. He glanced at Aaliyah, who was picking up her crutches again, and something flickered across his face, a flash of realization that whatever was happening here, it went deeper than a simple assault case. And from the way Holden sat back in his chair, arms folded like he'd already won, it was clear he thought no one could stop it. What he didn't see, what he couldn't see, was that someone already had their eye on every move he made, and that Aaliyah Moore wasn't as alone as she looked. The bailiff's voice cut through the low murmur of the crowd. "All rise." Everyone stood, but the air didn't move. It just thickened. When Judge Marion Blake took her seat again, her gavel barely touched the wood before Captain Rick Holden was already on his feet. "Your Honor," he said, his voice smooth but carrying that practiced edge of authority, "I request permission to directly address the defendant." Blake's eyes flicked toward Aaliyah, then back to Holden. "Proceed." Aaliyah sat poised in the witness chair, her crutches propped against the rail. The pale winter light streaming through the high windows caught the curve of her jaw. She didn't flinch as Holden stepped forward, each footstep echoing in the quiet like a countdown. He stopped just short of the stand, leaning slightly forward. His lips curled in a smirk. "You people," he said slowly, the venom in his tone unmistakable. "Think you can lay a hand on a cop and just walk away?" Before anyone could blink, his arm moved. The slap tore through the room, sharp, unfiltered, brutal. The sound was so loud, it was as if the walls themselves recoiled. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Someone muttered, "Oh my God!" Aaliyah's head turned with the force, but she didn't raise her hand to her cheek. She straightened her eyes, lifting not to Holden, not to the judge, but toward the back of the courtroom, as if focusing on something far beyond the moment. Judge Blake's reaction was a chilling non-reaction. Her gaze slid away, lips pressed together like she'd just watched a minor procedural hiccup. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded to Holden. "Continue." The silence that followed wasn't the quiet of order, it was the quiet of disbelief. Maya Torres, from her seat in the back, was already in motion. Her camera clicked in rapid bursts, the lens locked on Holden's looming figure and Aaliyah's steady posture. She knew she had captured something explosive, something the world wouldn't be able to ignore. Near the clerk's desk, David Cole leaned forward just enough for his words to reach the nearest ear. "Some people mistake silence for weakness," he murmured. "That's their first mistake." The red light of the courtroom security camera blinked steadily above them, recording every frame, every twitch of expression. Somewhere beyond this cold courtroom, this moment was already immortalized. Holden closed the final gap between them. His shadow fell across her face as he leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, taunting growl. "By the time I'm done," he whispered, "you'll beg for prison." Aaliyah's gaze finally shifted, meeting his for a single, unbroken second. Her voice was quiet but razor-sharp. "I don't beg. The words hit him harder than any physical strike could have. Holden's jaw clenched, his nostrils flaring, but he forced a thin smile as though trying to pretend the moment hadn't rattled him. Maya's finger froze over the shutter. That exchange, that look told her this case wasn't what it seemed. In the gallery, someone whispered, "Did that just happen?" A bailiff shifted in place, looking toward the judge, but Blake's expression was the same stone mask. Holden straightened, turned his back on Aaliyah like she wasn't worth the effort, and strolled toward the plaintiff's table. "Let's continue," he said, his tone almost bored. Judge Blake gestured. "Ask your questions, Captain." Holden's questions weren't questions, they were accusations dressed in legal language. "Where were you on the night of the incident? Who were you with? Did you resist when I tried to detain you?" Every one of them landed like a hammer designed to corner her, to force her to slip. But Aaliyah stayed steady. "I was walking home. I was alone." "No, I did not resist. I couldn't because you knocked my crutch out from under me." The gallery murmured again, the sound building like a slow rolling wave. David Cole's eyes sharpened. He didn't know the whole story, but he knew one thing: this wasn't just a trial. It was an ambush. And Aaliyah, she was holding something back. From the back row, Maya's phone buzzed. She glanced down. "That photo. If that's real, we're going front page." She didn't reply, because she knew deep in her gut the most dangerous moment hadn't even arrived yet. And when it did, it wouldn't just change this trial, it would change the balance of power in the entire room. Aaliyah wobbled for a split second after the slap, the weight on her bad leg threatening to tip her over. But she caught herself, crutches firm under her arms, and lifted her chin. For just a heartbeat, her eyes locked on Holden's, steady and unyielding. If he expected her to crumble, he got something else entirely. Holden smirked and turned on his heel, strolling back to the plaintiff's table, like a man who had already won. He slid into his seat, leaning back, fingers tapping lazily on the armrest as if the trial was just a formality before the inevitable verdict. From his spot near the clerk's desk, David Cole's expression barely moved, but his hands told a different story. He gathered a slim, sealed folder from his case, rose quietly, and slipped out the side door. The hallway outside the courtroom was cooler, emptier. David ducked into a recessed alcove, his back to the wall. From his coat pocket, he pulled a compact encrypted transmitter, one that most people wouldn't even recognize for what it was. With practiced fingers, he scanned the contents of the folder: personnel files, complaint records, and a single grainy photograph of Holden meeting someone in a dimly lit parking lot. He pressed a button. A faint click confirmed the file was on its way to a contact whose phone number was never written down, whose name never appeared in any government directory. CIA eyes now watching. Back inside, Maya Torres had vanished from her seat. She was in the hallway too, phone held low, speaking softly to a man leaning against the wall near the vending machines. He was older, with the cautious air of someone who had more to lose than to gain by talking. "You know Holden?" she asked. The man's eyes darted toward the courtroom doors. "Knew him. Worked under him for 6 years." "You want the truth?" "That's why I'm here," she said. "He's had more complaints than any cop in this county. Excessive force, intimidation, harassment, you name it. But every single one vanished, like they never existed. Folks who filed them, some moved away, some just stopped talking. No one pushes that many papers out of existence unless they've got friends in high places." Maya's pen scratched fast. "Would you say he's untouchable?" The man gave a dry laugh. "Until now. Yeah, untouchable." Her phone buzzed, another text from her editor. "Whatever you're digging into, keep going. This has legs." Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, Judge Blake was droning through a procedural point, the sound oddly muted against the pulse in Aaliyah's ears. She glanced toward the gallery, catching sight of Maya slipping back into her seat, eyes burning with the kind of focus only a big story could ignite. And then, without warning, the room shifted in her mind. A flash of memory the night of her arrest. Holden's voice barking orders the shove that sent her to the pavement, her crutch clattering away, the pain in her knee flaring as his boot pressed her down. She'd swung at him not hard, just enough to get air, but it was enough for the charge. She remembered the bystander's phone raised, filming everything. But when she'd asked her lawyer about the footage later, he'd just shaken his head. No such video in the evidence file. Lies stacked on lies. Her breath slowed the heat in her chest, cooling into something sharper, something that wouldn't burn out quickly. The courtroom door opened quietly. A court officer stepped inside, walking directly to Holden's table. He placed a thick, unmarked envelope into the captain's hand. Holden opened it under the desk, his eyes flicking over the single sheet inside. A thin smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. Written in bold block letters, "She's alone now." Holden folded the note back into the envelope and tucked it into his jacket. Then, without even looking at Aaliyah, he leaned back in his chair, the picture of a man who believed the game was already his. From the back, Maya saw it. From the side, David Cole saw it too, re-entering just in time. Neither of them knew yet what the note meant. But Aaliyah, she felt it, the way predators feel a storm coming. The bailiff moved in one hand on Aaliyah's elbow, guiding her away from the witness stand. The echo of her crutches hitting the polished floor was steady, deliberate, until a sound cut through it. Clink. It was sharp, metallic, heavy enough to make the room pause for half a heartbeat. Heads turned in unison, scanning the floor. Aaliyah stopped mid-step. Her eyes dropped, her lips tightening as David Cole stepped forward, crouching. His fingers closed around the fallen object, and when he straightened, the light hit it just right, catching every engraved detail on its silver surface. A CIA high-clearance badge. David froze for the briefest moment, his thumb brushing over the seal. He didn't need a manual to know this wasn't a fake. Not this weight. Not this precision. From the plaintiff's table, Holden's voice broke the silence. "What's that?" It was casual on the surface, but there was an edge beneath it, a strain in his tone. He strode over, snatching the badge from David's hand before anyone could stop him. The metal clicked against his wedding band as he turned it over. "Fake," he said flatly, forcing a scoff. "Nice trick, kid. Did you print this in shop class?" But his eyes betrayed him. They lingered on the serial number longer than necessary, and his grip on the badge wasn't steady. Judge Blake looked up briefly. "If it's evidence, Mr. Holden, place it with the clerk." Holden didn't move. He kept staring at it like it had just whispered a threat. From the back, Maya lifted her camera. Click, click. She zoomed in close, catching the way Holden's fingers tightened and the almost invisible tick in his jaw. She quickly labeled the shot. Evidence unknown. David met Aaliyah's eyes. She held his gaze and gave a subtle shake of her head, slow, deliberate. Not yet. Holden finally set the badge down on the prosecution table, but before straightening, he leaned in toward Aaliyah. His voice dropped to a low, venomous murmur. "Cute stunt. But you have no idea whose attention you just got." Aaliyah's tone was even steady. "Neither do you." Holden's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. He straightened, glancing at the judge like nothing had happened, but the air had changed. Spectators leaned toward each other, whispering. "That's real, isn't it? Looks like federal issue. Why would she have it?" Holden shifted his stance, catching the eye of a uniformed guard near the back. With a barely noticeable nod, he signaled. The guard hesitated, then moved to the double doors. Thunk. The latch slid into place, sealing the courtroom. David's brow furrowed. Maya's camera lowered her senses on alert. Aaliyah's chest rose and fell slowly, her grip tightening on the handles of her crutches. In the sudden stillness, Holden's voice cut in low enough for only a few to hear. "Let's make sure this little show doesn't get an encore." The badge still lay there on the table, gleaming under the fluorescent light, silent, but carrying the weight of a storm that was just starting to form. David Cole slipped out through the side door, his footsteps muffled on the worn courthouse carpet. The air in the hallway felt colder, sharper, as if the walls themselves were listening. Near the end of the corridor, a man in a janitor's uniform was sweeping too clean for someone actually working. His posture straightened when David approached. Without a word, David slid an envelope into the man's bucket, the faint rustle of paper swallowed by the squeak of the mop wringer. Inside, 2 grainy stills of Holden gripping the CIA badge, plus Maya's sharp, clear close-up. And tucked in the fold, a brief line in David's handwriting. It's hers, and it's real. The janitor glanced down once, then back at David. "This goes straight to Langley," he murmured. His voice carried the crisp authority of someone who didn't need to prove who they were. He closed the bucket lid and pushed it away, disappearing into the service elevator. Back inside the courtroom, Holden had closed the distance to Aaliyah. His shadow fell across her, his voice low and dripping with mockery. "You think Mommy can save you?" His breath smelled faintly of coffee and arrogance. Aaliyah's eyes lifted to his steady and unblinking. "You think that's who I'm waiting for?" Holden's smirk faltered, just for a beat. Near the press row, Maya shifted in her seat phone hidden in her lap. Her thumb hovered over the Go Live button. This could blow everything open. But before she could press it, a shadow loomed. A courthouse security officer stepped up, hand out. "Hand it over." "It's public court," she argued, keeping her voice calm. "Not anymore," he said. His fingers curled toward the phone. Maya tilted the screen away, slipping it under a folder just in time. The officer's jaw tightened, but he stepped back, eyes lingering on her like a warning. From the bench, Judge Blake's gavel tapped once too soft to command order, more like a reflex. Her brow furrowed, and for the first time there was something unguarded in her eyes. A flicker of worry. Then came the sound. Heavy, deliberate footfalls in the hallway. The kind of walk that wasn't rushed, but still made people get out of the way. Each step echoed closer, louder, as if the building itself recognized the weight behind them. Holden glanced toward the doors, his jaw clenching. Aaliyah didn't move, but David, back in his seat, now shifted slightly, his gaze fixed forward, waiting. The spectators grew still. Even the hum of whispered side conversations died out. Then, the handle turned. Slowly. The latch released with a faint metallic click, and a thin slice of light from the hallway cut into the dimmer glow of the courtroom. Dust motes drifted lazily through the beam, and for a second, it felt like the room was holding its breath. The doors didn't just open, they exploded inward with a force that made half the courtroom flinch. Every head turned, and there she was. Elena Moore stepped through like the air itself had been waiting for her. Black tailored suit hair pulled back in a flawless twist, eyes cold and sharp enough to cut the room in half. She didn't look around for permission. She didn't need to. The hum of whispers rose instantly, rippling from the front row to the gallery. I swear even the ceiling lights seemed to burn brighter, as if they knew who had just arrived. Without breaking stride, Elena reached into her jacket and produced a small black leather case. The silver crest of the CIA gleamed under the fluorescent lights. She flipped it open just long enough for the security detail to see. The reaction was immediate. 2 guards straightened as if yanked by invisible strings. Their posture snapped, rigid hands instinctively moving away from their weapons. Holden was the first to speak, his voice catching in his throat before finding its footing. "Ma'am, this is a court of law." Elena didn't slow. She kept walking until she was right in front of him. Then she spoke quietly, but in a tone that carried to the farthest seat. "And I," she said, her eyes locked on his, "am the law you fear the most." The room went still. Even Judge Blake shifted in his chair, fingers tugging at the front of his robe. He avoided her gaze like a man who'd just been reminded of every mistake he'd ever made. Maya's camera clicked rapidly, each flash catching the faint tremor in Holden's jaw. She knew she was getting the shot, the one that would define this entire trial. From where I sat, I could see David Cole lean slightly forward as if bracing for what came next. His expression was calm, but there was a spark in his eyes, a flicker of recognition. Elena finally turned from Holden to face the bench. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Judge Blake," she said, voice steady as a blade. "We're doing this my way now." Gasps broke out across the gallery. Holden tried to laugh, just a sharp exhale. Nothing genuine, but it died halfway out. "You don't have the authority," to Elena's hand, shot up palm out, silencing him without another word. "Detective," she said evenly, "if you speak again without my permission, you'll be answering questions in a federal interview room by nightfall. And I promise you those walls don't echo." The guards by the door glanced at each other. One actually swallowed hard. From the back, someone whispered, "That's her! That's Aaliyah's mother!" The words traveled like static. Within seconds, the entire back row was buzzing. Judge Blake cleared his throat, the sound brittle. "Agent Moore, I must remind you." "You don't remind me of anything, Judge," she cut in. "You listen, and you decide whether you want your name in tomorrow's headlines for the right reasons or the wrong ones." Silence. Pure, dangerous silence. Elena stepped closer to the bench. She didn't raise her voice, but every syllable landed heavy. "You've let this circus go on long enough. You've allowed an officer to assault my daughter in your courtroom. And you've sat there hiding behind procedure as though the truth was optional. It's not." Her gaze moved deliberately to Holden again, pinning him like a specimen. "And you don't mistake this for a negotiation. It's over." Holden opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Maya lowered her camera for a moment, eyes wide. She looked like she'd just seen the ground tilt under everyone's feet. From the defense table, Aaliyah sat straighter. She hadn't spoken since her mother walked in, but her expression had shifted, no longer the quiet, controlled mask she'd worn for hours. There was something else there now. Resolve. Elena turned to her daughter briefly, and in that split second the ice in her expression softened. "You did well," she said quietly enough that only those nearest could hear. "Now let me finish this." The moment passed. The steel returned. She addressed the entire courtroom, her words crisp. "This proceeding is no longer under the sole jurisdiction of this court. As of this moment, it is under federal review. Every action from this point forward will be recorded, logged, and sent to my office. Anyone who interferes will be detained." You could hear the shuffling of feet as people adjusted in their seats. One juror actually gripped the edge of the box knuckles white. David Cole slipped out of the room with the calm of a man who knew exactly what was happening next. Elena didn't wait for acknowledgement. She reached into her jacket again and pulled out a slim folder, placing it directly on the bench. "This," she said, "is everything you've been ignoring for months. Evidence, sworn statements, recordings, including the last 10 minutes in this room." Judge Blake didn't touch it. His eyes flicked to Holden, then to the security guards, then back to her. "I'll give you one choice," Elena said. "Either we proceed with the truth on the record, or we proceed with you on the record." The judge's lips pressed into a thin line. Maya raised her camera again, whispering under her breath, "God, this is history." Elena turned, surveying the room like a general measuring the battlefield. "From here on out," she said, "the rules have changed." And with that, she took the seat beside her daughter, her presence alone rearranging the entire balance of power in the room. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the air seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Elena didn't waste time. "Roll the footage." She ordered, her voice calm, but the weight behind it left no room for argument. The clerk hesitated, glancing toward Judge Blake for approval. Elena didn't even look his way. Now. A few keystrokes later, the courtroom monitors flickered to life. Grainy security footage filled the screen's wide-angle timestamp in the corner, and there it was. The slap. It wasn't just a slap. It was violent, deliberate, and loud enough in the recording to make the room flinch in unison. The sound cracked through the speakers like a gunshot. Aaliyah's head snapped to the side. In the video, her hands bound her balance, breaking. No one spoke. The silence was heavier than anything I'd felt in that room yet. Elena let the moment hang before stepping forward. That happened in this court, in front of a sitting judge, in front of officers sworn to uphold the law. And every single one of you watched it happen. Holden shifted in his seat, jaw tight, but his eyes darted just enough to betray that flicker of unease. Then Elena's voice sharpened. And here's what you didn't know: Aaliyah Moore wasn't just here to testify. She was here to finish an operation, an undercover sting to expose a federal police corruption network, one that has been protected, hidden, and shielded for years. And Detective Holden, she turned her gaze on him, unblinking. You're not just part of it. You're one of its key pillars. The reaction was instant. Murmurs rippled through the gallery, chairs creaked as people leaned forward. David Cole rose from his seat at the back, moving with the deliberate calm of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his mind for months. He walked to the bench, set a thick black folder down in front of Judge Blake, and spoke for the first time. Under federal authority, I am confirming Agent Moore's statement. The contents of this file include sealed testimonies, wiretap transcripts, and financial trails leading directly to the defendant, Detective Holden, and his associates. The judge's eyes flicked from the folder to Elena. This is irregular, he muttered. Highly irregular. Elena didn't wait for him to finish. From her briefcase, she pulled a crisp white document with a gold seal and handed it to the bailiff. Read it out loud. The bailiff's voice carried across the room. Federal subpoena order to comply immediately with investigative procedures under Title 18. Judge Blake tried to cut in, but Elena's tone was ice. This is no longer your game, Judge. The only choice you have is whether you cooperate or obstruct. And I remind you, obstruction is a federal crime. You could feel the shift. The power that had sat in the judge's hands all morning now lived squarely with her. Holden leaned back in his chair, then forward again, resting his elbows on the table. He stared at Elena with an expression I couldn't quite read, part rage, part disbelief, part something darker. Then out of nowhere, he started laughing. Not the casual kind, not even the smug kind. This was unsteady, manic, like a man who'd just decided the fire was worth walking into. You think you've won? He said, his voice low but carrying. Lady, you just started a war you can't win. The room went still again. Elena didn't answer. She didn't need to. She simply closed the folder in front of her, leaned back in her chair, and gave him a look that said one thing: We'll see. And for the first time since the trial began, I wasn't sure who in that room was more dangerous. It happened so fast, some people didn't even register it until it was already over. 2 federal agents moved in from the side doors, silent, precise, like they'd been waiting for this cue all morning. Before Holden could even push back from his chair, cold steel cuffs locked around his wrists. You have the right to remain silent, one agent said, his tone clipped professional. Holden didn't fight. He just stared straight ahead, jaw tight, his laughter from moments ago gone like smoke. The agents pulled him to his feet, and as they walked him down the center aisle, the room's eyes followed like he was some fallen king being paraded through his own court. That's when I noticed that some of the officers in the back shifted uncomfortably. A few exchanged glances they couldn't quite hide. And then, one older sergeant, his hair silver, his uniform perfectly pressed, slowly reached up, unclipped his badge from his chest, and set it on the nearest bench. He didn't say a word, just turned and walked out. Elena stepped forward, her heels sharp against the polished floor. She didn't hurry. She didn't need to. By the time she reached the front, she was the only force in the room anyone was looking at. Her gaze swept the gallery, then the officers, then Judge Blake. It wasn't anger in her eyes. It was something heavier. Authority. Behind her, Aaliyah finally lifted her head. Her expression didn't change. No smile, no triumph, but her eyes found Holden's as he passed. She held his gaze for just a second. No words, no satisfaction. Just a silent acknowledgement that whatever he thought this day would be, It wasn't this. David Cole rose again, stepping up to the bench. He set another thick folder down, the thud echoing in the now quiet room. "Everything you need is right here," he said. Judge Blake reached for it, but his hand trembled just enough for everyone to notice. Click. The sound of Maya's camera shutter broke the stillness. She was capturing it all. Holden being led out between two agents, Aaliyah standing behind them, calm and unshaken, the picture of quiet resolve. She knew this shot would outlive the day. And then, movement in the crowd. Near the back, a man in a gray overcoat rose from his seat. No one else seemed to notice him. He kept his head down as he slipped toward the side aisle, weaving between the benches until he reached the door. He didn't look back, but something about the way he left, slow, deliberate, sent a cold ripple through me. Whoever he wasn't just a bystander, and I couldn't shake the feeling. He wasn't leaving this story behind. When the heavy oak doors swung open, the chill outside felt almost sharper than the tension we'd just left behind. Elena stepped out first, Aaliyah just behind her. The sun caught on the edge of Elena's black suit, casting a hard glint that seemed to cut through the murmurs of the crowd. And then, silence. Two lines of people stood on either side of the courthouse steps. Officers, bystanders, reporters. No one moving, no one speaking. A few nodded respectfully. A handful, their eyes lowered, couldn't meet Elena's gaze at all. David Cole joined them at the bottom of the steps, slipping his hands into his coat pockets. That, he said with a faint grin, was one hell of a roar for someone who never said a word. Aaliyah glanced at him, the corner of her mouth barely lifting. Sometimes she said softly, "Silence says more than any speech ever could." Maya was already in motion, phone held high, live streaming every second. The red live icon glowed in the corner of the screen as the chat exploded, thousands of messages racing by. The feed framed the two women against the courthouse columns, side by side, unshaken. Within minutes, the footage would be everywhere. That's when I caught sight of him again. At the far edge of the crowd, the man in the gray overcoat stood still, jotting something into a small notebook. His head never rose high enough for me to see his face clearly, but I could feel his attention fixed on them. And then, without a word, he closed the notebook, turned, and slipped down a narrow side alley. One moment he was there. The next, gone. Elena and Aaliyah continued down the steps, their pace unhurried. The weight of what had happened inside the courtroom hung in the air, but it wasn't oppressive anymore. It was final, at least for today. As they reached the waiting car, the crowd began to stir again. Conversations sparked in hushed voices. Cameras clicked. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, but it didn't touch this moment. In the quiet that followed, my own voice filled the space, at least in my head. Justice was served today, but in the dark corridors of power, shadows still wait. And sometimes the quiet ones are the ones you should fear the most. The car door shut. The engine started. And just like that, they were gone. And that's where we'll leave this story for today. What we just witnessed wasn't just about winning in court. It was about courage without noise, truth without compromise, and the power of standing your ground even when the odds feel impossible. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, I'd love for you to be part of our journey here on Mr. Max Stories. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next powerful chapter we bring to life. Your support isn't just a number. It's what keeps our team motivated to keep digging deeper, telling stories that matter, and giving a voice to moments that should never be forgotten. Remember, here on Mr. Max Stories, silence can roar, and every story leaves a mark.